Hey, welcome back. We are continuing the story of the Bible Jesus Read by Philip Yancey. Hopefully you've been enjoying it. I think we're gonna finish chapter 3 today on Deuteronomy. And so let's just get started and see where we end up. Deuteronomy adds this eulogy. Since then, no prophet has risen in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, who did all those miraculous signs and wonders the Lord sent him to do in Egypt, to Pharaoh and to all the officials and to his whole land, for no one has ever shown the mighty power or performed the awesome deeds that Moses did in the sight of Israel. He was their preacher, historian, scholar, prophet, judge, politician, priest. Centuries later, another Jewish writer, Elie Wiesel, elaborated on Moses' contribution in Messengers of God. Moses, the most solitary and most powerful hero in biblical history. The immensity of his task and the scope of his experience command our admiration, our reverence, our awe. Moses, the man who changed the course of history all by himself. His emergence became the decisive turning point. After him, nothing was the same again. It's not surprising that he occupies a special place in Jewish tradition. His passion for social justice, his struggle for national liberation, his triumphs and disappointments, his poetical inspirations, his gifts as a strategist, and his organizational genius, his complex relationship with God and his people, his requirements and promises, his condemnations and blessings, his bursts of anger, his silences, his efforts to reconcile the law with compassion, authority with integrity. No individual ever, anywhere, accomplished so much for so many people in so many different domains. His influence is boundless. It reverberates beyond time. The law bears his name. The Talmud is but its commentary, and Kabbalah communicates only its silence. After Moses, nothing was the same again. One man came to stand for his people, and with good reason. Adopted by an imperial parent, punished for his rashness, sentenced to wander 40 years in the wilderness, forgiven, restored, hand selected for an impossible task, accompanied by the overwhelming presence of God at every step, Moses' personal history replays in miniature the history of his people. Modern readers, excited by the thrill of the Exodus, pay little attention to the 400 years of misery that preceded it, or the abysmal failures in the Sinai and in the Promised Land that succeeded it, which is why the Bible includes Deuteronomy in the first place, and why optimistic Americans especially ought to pay it more mind. Others have borrowed part of Moses' messages, but none have quite got it right. Liberationists of all stripes, from Marxists to American slaves to base communities in Latin America, have appropriated the language of Exodus, yet all lack Moses' unstinting realism. They drift into utopian promises of a promised land that has never been and will never be. Realize this side of eternity. O Canaan, sweet Canaan, I am bound for the land of Canaan. Gonna lay down my sword and shield down by the riverside. I ain't gonna study war no more. Often these utopians end up creating a political system more tyrannical than the one they sought liberation from. African colonies drive out the imperialists only to face new crises of tribalism and independence. Small countries escape the dark shadow of the Soviet Union only to disintegrate into civil war. The Old Testament should come with a warning. Don't read Exodus without also reading Deuteronomy. It would save a lot of disillusionment for politicians and preachers both. Pious Christians have also borrowed Moses' language to describe a victorious Christian life on the other side of the Jordan River. On Jordan's stormy banks I stand and cast a wishful eye to Canaan's fair and happy land where my possessions lie. No chilling winds nor poisonous breath can reach that healthful shore. Sickness and sorrow, pain and death are felt and feared no more. Such visions paint Egypt as a dark land of seductive fleshpots And the wilderness is a trial by ordeal necessary to pass through before arriving in the sun-drenched promised land at last. The 7 last chapters of Deuteronomy should forever disabuse that notion. Life with God is never so easy, so settled for any of us. Not for the Hebrews then, and not for us living today. The pilgrim must ever progress uphill, meeting new enemies around every bend. Moses was the single greatest realist about life with God. A proto-prophet, he gave God's message to the people, never diluting or belying it. A proto-priest, he represented the people to God with passion, conviction, and love. He made no promises of happy endings. His own life had none, yet never did he look back with regret. The luxuries of Egypt and the solitary comfort of a nomad's life had both lost their appeal. He belonged with his people, the whole swarming, cantankerous lot of them, and with his God, the one he had come to know as a friend face to face. The Lord is compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in love, sang a psalmist years later, quoting the sacred Shema that Moses had first given to his people. That prayer is still prayed every morning and every evening by Jews around the world. God has bound his love in a covenant, so that even though emotions will rise and fall in the end, the love will always prevail. He will not always curse, or he will not always accuse, nor will he harbor his anger forever. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is the love for those who fear him. And as far as the east is from the west, so far he removed our transgressions from us. As a father has compassion on his children, so the Lord has compassion on those who fear him. For he knows how we are formed. He remembers that we are dust. Dust, haparu, the dusty ones. The old Egyptian slang word for Hebrews. God remembers that we are dust. As Moses taught so clearly, evil is unpreventable and punishment inevitable. But we have a God who consciously forgets our sins and consciously remembers our frailty. We have a God who travels by our side, who tabernacles among us through the vast and dreadful wilderness. We have a God of grace who loves even the dusty ones, especially the dusty ones. There are 2 postscripts to Moses' sad, eloquent speeches in Deuteronomy. The first involves an event that occurred after Moses' dire predictions about his people had come true. Following Moses' death, the Hebrews crossed the Jordan, conquered Canaan, built cities, grew strong and prosperous, and promptly forgot about God. The nation split into 2, invaders came, Jerusalem fell under siege, and the horror scenes that Moses foretold, parents eating their own children, became a matter of historical record. Once again, God intervened with miraculous deliverance, giving his people another chance. 2 kings later, the child king Josiah had a nostalgic notion to repair the temple and renew some of the ancient religious practices. God's holy city had sunk to historic lows. The temple featured idols, male shrine prostitutes, and carved horses dedicated to sun worshippers. In a nearby valley, people burned their children and sacrificed to the god Molech. All sacred records had disappeared. The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the God of Moses, was a faint memory. While rummaging through the rubble, the high priest found the Book of the Covenant, which most likely consisted of portions of Deuteronomy. 2 Kings 22 and 23 tells the dramatic story of what followed. A spiritual house cleaning and revival that few precedents in history. The king wept, tore his robe, and ordered that Moses' law be restored in the nation. At the end of this revolution of belief, Josiah called the whole nation together and celebrated the Passover. Not since the days of the judges who led Israel, nor throughout the days of the kings of Israel and the kings of Judah had any such Passover been observed. Moses may have never made it to the promised land, but his spirit lived on. bringing renewal, hope, and literal salvation to the descendants of those that he led to the border. The second postscript appears in the New Testament. Jesus knew Deuteronomy well. During his own wilderness sojourn, he quoted from it 3 times to counter Satan's temptations. Later, at a hinge in his ministry, Jesus climbed a high mountain to meet with God the Father. As when Moses met with God on the sacred mountain, Jesus' appearance changed too. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun. His clothes became dazzling white, whiter than anyone in the world could bleach them. Peter and John shrank back, dazed by the scene. A voice rumbled from heaven, and suddenly, there on the mountaintop before them, stood 2 giants of Israelites' history. At once they recognized Elijah, the fierce, wonder-working prophet whose return every Jew anticipated. Just to his side, it could be no one else, stood Moses, engaged in casual conversation with Jesus. Peter grew so excited that he clumsily proposed erecting tents to entice the celestial visitors to stick around. Jesus calmed his 2 disciples, then led the pair down the mountain back to the earth. The miracle gave him new energy and boldness to face difficult days ahead. The scene of Jesus' transfiguration contains a fact often overlooked by Christians, but poignant for any Jew. At that moment of tender mercy, Moses finally realized his life dream. He stood on a mountaintop, smack in the middle of the promised land. Indeed, God remembers his dusty ones, the meekest and the greatest. That's the end of chapter 3. I hope you really enjoyed it and got some great things out of it. Leave a comment down below, maybe of something that you got from this past chapter. Next time we'll start chapter 4, Psalms, Spirituality in Every Key. And I hope you'll really enjoy that one as well. And next time I won't have a beard. All right, I'll see you next time.